James, you can start sharing your screen when you are ready.
Perfect. Can you see this?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to this webinar, which is being hosted as part of Bioeconomy Ireland Week, and it's being hosted by two projects, the InformBio project and the FORESIGHT project. So just to let you know that the event is going to be recorded and it will be available to watch on the InformBio YouTube later for people who aren't able to join at this time. And it's part of Bioeconomy Ireland Week, which is a week-long schedule of activities highlighting the potential of bioeconomy in Ireland, trying to improve stakeholder awareness, trying to bring the bioeconomy to new people, and to highlight all of the innovations that are happening and all of the knowledge that's been generated through all of the research activities and other activities that are under development in Ireland. So as the event progresses, we're going to have a number of talks and then we're going to have a panel discussion. If people want to ask questions, you're free to put them in the chat and then we'll come to them and address them to the speakers as we can during the event. If certain questions don't get asked, we'll ask the speakers who are on the call to write the response in the chat in case we don't have time to answer everything. So if you do have a question, it would be good to highlight the speaker that this is supposed to be directed to, so we know who needs to respond to it. And as much as possible, we'll try to ask any questions during the seminar itself. So this is today's agenda. The event is called The Cost of Not Developing a Circular Bioeconomy. And when we talk about costs here, there are a number of different perspectives: the economic cost and the implications of not developing a circular bioeconomy, as well as the missed opportunities for diversification and development and competitiveness and everything like this, but also the environmental costs and the potential of the bioeconomy to contribute to our climate and environmental targets that might be missed if we don't take this opportunity. And we'll be presenting perspectives which are informed by carbon accounting and foresight, including some new results coming out of these projects, InformBio and FORESIGHT, as well as some expert international speakers as well. So I'm going to do just a short introduction. I'll be passing off to Professor David Stiles from the University of Galway. David is going to present about hard-nosed choices in an uncertain future. Then we'll have a presentation from Dr. George Bishop at the University of Galway, which will focus on LCA, a snapshot of climate mitigation pathways for Ireland. So there'll be a number of LCA case studies. We'll then have a panel discussion where we'll bring in some expert guests, including Evan Carey from the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment here in Ireland, Stefan Mayer, who's from DBFZ, as well as the German representative to IEA Task 45, and Ellie Foster, who's participating from the organization DRAX, who have a special focus on renewable energy, as well as carbon capture and sequestration. And then we'll have some Q&A, so we'll get some of your questions before we finish, and hopefully we can do all that within the next 90 minutes. So just briefly to introduce the InformBio project. So InformBio is a 4-year project funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. If you want to access the website, you can scan here the green QR code for our webpage or the black QR code for our newsletter. We have 4 partners, so it is coordinated by MTU, Munster Technological University, where I'm based, in partnership with the University of Galway, where Dave and George are based, Teagasc, and the Central Statistics Office. This is just some of our project team. Just to mention, the Central Statistics Office account for a lot of data collection in Ireland, so a very important partner to the work we're doing. And then MTU, University of Galway, Teagasc are more of the academic partners on the project. Just to briefly mention about the approach of the InformBio project. So we have two components of our project. The first is around a foresight study for developing Ireland's bioeconomy up to 2050. So this includes a number of different components, including quantifying feedstock availability, screening potential bio-based value chains, doing some life cycle assessments on these value chains, and then finally modeling these value chains from a foresight perspective, which Dave will talk about, with a view of understanding how these combinations of bio-based technologies can contribute to Ireland's 2050 climate neutrality targets. On the other aspect of the project, we're working to develop a bioeconomy monitoring framework. So this is where we develop indicators to cover different aspects of the bioeconomy. So for example, social, environmental and economic areas of the bioeconomy. And we work on collecting data to try and understand the progress that Ireland is making across these indicators and towards our bioeconomy targets as a whole. So it helps us to measure our contribution to achieving this circular bioeconomy for Ireland. It exists at the EU level. We're trying to develop this at a national and regional level from an Irish perspective. Just to briefly talk about the Foresight project, which Dave leads. So Foresight is funded by the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment here in Ireland, and it is focused on the application of farm, value chain and land use models to explore alternative future land use combinations in Ireland, and that can deliver to different objectives related to climate, air and water quality, food security, and developing a vibrant rural economy, considering uncertain futures. And it's led by University of Galway, but it's implemented in collaboration with the University of Limerick, the ICHEC, and FIRS, the Forest Environmental Research and Services. So just in terms of the focus of today's event, in Bioeconomy Ireland Week, there have been different events which have highlighted a lot of the great activity that's going on in Ireland from a bioeconomy perspective. And I think Evan, later in our panel discussion, will talk about some of those developments, which is fantastic to see Ireland becoming a real player in bringing this innovation out from lab scale research into real world implementation. We have a number of demonstration projects being developed across a number of sectors and feedstock areas, from the green biorefinery research to areas of such as areas like anaerobic digestion, which are now being funded through the Climate Action Fund, and different biorefinery initiatives as well. So based on some of the talks this week, there's projected to be around 9 individual biorefinery demonstrators, which may be up and running based on government investment over the last number of years, which is significant. So I suppose the question from our side is trying to understand what is the potential of a lot of these technologies and innovations to contribute to our climate targets, and also understanding the economic possibilities around these as well. And that's what we've been looking at within the InformBio and Foresight project. So there's like an intersection between these two projects, which is starting to scope out the potential of these technologies individually and in combination to contribute to Ireland's overall climate neutrality targets, but also other environmental challenges as well, which I think George will bring up in his presentation. So that's it from me. So we're going to have 2 parts to the agenda. So to begin with, we're going to have some presentations from Dave and George, and then we're going to focus on the panel discussion a little bit later. So just to give Dave an introduction. So Dave is Associate Professor in Agri-Sustainability and Co-Director on the Agricultural Science BSc program, and he delivers problem-based learning across various sustainability-focused modules. His research is focused on understanding intersystem sustainability at all levels, with expertise across food, energy, bioproduct, and waste management systems based on 20 years of experience undertaking life cycle assessment. He leads and PIs several projects at EU and national level and is a member of IEA Task 45, assessing the sustainability of bioenergy and climate change. He's also a member of the Climate Change Advisory Council's Carbon Budget Committee and the Expert Advisory Board to Ireland's National Bioeconomy Forum. He coordinates the FORESIGHT Modelling Consortium, providing agricultural and land use modelling services to the Irish government, and contributes to the National Land Use Review. So no better person to talk about this topic on hard-nosed choices in an uncertain future. So I'm going to give the floor to Dave next.
Thanks very much, James.
Thanks, Dave.
So now I'm just going to do the old screen share and hope it works properly. It did earlier on. And I'll also set my timer so I don't waffle on too long. Sorry.
That's perfect. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction, James. Appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think could be hard-nosed choices in an uncertain world. Hopefully you can see my screen and that's all working okay. Just shout if not. So, sorry. Is everything working? That's great. Yes. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for confirming. So, look, I couldn't find any nice pictures of a hard nose. So this is my depiction of a hard-nosed choice, where you see this popping up throughout the presentation, this nice little monkey here. So, look, the agri-food sector in Ireland is very efficient at many things, very efficient at producing milk and other products, and that's all very positive. But nonetheless, we have some pretty fundamental intertwined challenges, which are very big and difficult to address. So one of them is that economically, just 43% of farms in Ireland are classified as economically viable, and we have a very big succession challenge. The average age of farmers is about 59, and there's not necessarily clear interest in the next generation of always taking over the family farm. So that's a challenge. On the other hand, the fact that we have lots of family farms, 138,000 farms or so, and lots of land and family ownership, it is probably a positive thing for the rural economy and social cohesion. So that's very positive and something that policymakers and the society would like to keep. So the challenge then is how to keep these small family farms in family ownership. Meanwhile, we have these other problems. We've got over 20 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Over 35% of national emissions come from agriculture. Another 5 or 6 million tons at least come from the rest of the land use sector. So we have huge emissions, 40% of national emissions coming from agriculture and land use. And we need to reduce those emissions, because otherwise we're going to be subjected to very high compliance costs in the future, post 2030, under the emission sharing regulation of the EU. And those fines could amount easily to billions of euros per year. Meanwhile, we're subsidizing the existing system to keep it going, because we recognize the value of having lots of small family farms. Farm subsidies are worth about 2 billion euros per year. So there's been a lot of effort on trying to achieve mitigation across farms in Ireland, and that's all very positive, but a lot of it is focused on farm level with the existing structure, if you like, and the existing activities. So many regulations have been quite reactive to problems with a micro focus. But we do know from other work that's been going on that we really face landscape scale challenges and national scale challenges, and these require structural shifts. We require a land use strategy to address some of these things. We don't actually have a land use strategy. We don't have a climate neutrality strategy. That's fundamentally problematic. And it feels often like we're trying to kind of plug leaks rather than actually diverting the flow and find genuine long-term solutions to agricultural and land use challenges. And this is for good reasons. I mean, it's not easy to be a policymaker at the best of times, and it's certainly not easy these days. So this is not a direct criticism of policymakers, but it's just a reflection that they're exposed to very strong lobbies from vested interests, a lot of misinformation online and social media, very little screening of quality of information these days. We have delayed responses to land use decisions. So even where the right decisions are made, for various reasons, they won't translate into positive outcomes for many years, could be decades. We have uncertain geopolitics. Generally, nobody likes change. And there's been a populist backlash against measures in some countries, such as the Netherlands. So you can see why there's a lot of resistance, if you like, to making bold decisions that we probably need to make in agriculture and land use. Having said all that, it's really clear that without strategic and realistic vision, agriculture and land use policy is really setting farmers up to fail. There is no good outcome from not actually instigating some kind of substantial change across the sector. However, how do we plan? How do we make the right decisions if we think about transformative change, which science says we need to tackle climate change? That's a very difficult thing to do, and policymakers would like some certainty about the outcomes, and that's particularly difficult in an uncertain future. So there's no ideal way to do this. I think this is a new kind of concept of resilience and uncertainty that people are grappling with. One framework that's been used for international assessment models for climate pathways is the shared socio-economic pathway approach. Now, I won't go into detail here, but the point is that we have different ways that the world could look in 25, 30 years' time. We could have an optimistic scenario where we collaborate together, we have strong democracy, strong institutions, we aim to reduce inequality, we aim to tackle problems through consumption shifts and technology. And that would lead to many positive benefits, not necessarily a path we're on, but that's a path that a lot of policymakers aspire to. We have perhaps a more Trumpian version of the world where we have fragmentation, we have trade barriers. That's also very difficult potentially for farmers because Ireland exports 90% of food and milk and beef products. So we would have big barriers, if you like, to doing things as we do now. In this more optimistic scenario, many positive outcomes, but it does imply high carbon costs, which would imply quite high costs for the way we do things now. And we have various other iterations. So it's just to say, we can structure our thoughts about the future by thinking about what that future could look like. We can't be certain about that, but at least it helps us to have some coherence to how we address future choices. So what are the implications from Irish agriculture? Well, something that's very clear when you look at those different narratives, if you like, around the different SSP scenarios, is that they come with different opportunities and different barriers and different costs. And if we think about business as usual, it requires an almost implausible confluence of circumstances, which is very unlikely to happen to be prosperous. So to be prosperous, business as usual would require low input costs with low trade barriers, high output prices, no trade barriers, strong economies, continued subsidies, strong climate mitigation by the whole world to avoid climate disruption to food production itself, but at the same time, low or no carbon costs because of the very high carbon emissions from Irish agriculture, which implies in turn some kind of Irish exceptionalism. We need almost magical solutions for water pollution and biodiversity loss because we occupy over 70% of the land with current agricultural practices in Ireland. And we need to convince the next generation of farmers to keep going as we are now for relatively low returns in many cases. So when you look at it that way, it's a very unlikely confluence of events and future scenarios that would lead to business as usual actually succeeding. More realistically, we're likely to plod along and then there'll be disorderly reactive changes to events. There'll be stranded assets because we've malinvested in trying to mitigate in a certain way when actually we have to more fundamentally change the structure of the sector. And that could be in response to various elements of the optimistic or pessimistic scenarios I just showed to you. The pathways won't be linear, and so we're likely to go through political cycles. Human nature will play its part, but it's clear that the future will look very different and business as usual is not well set up for it. So I would draw the conclusion then that structural change is inevitable and just plowing ahead, tinkering, hoping for the best is not going to be successful for farmers. It's actually setting them up to fail. And that's where the bioeconomy becomes quite interesting. So just to give you a taste of how we could start to look at this, we applied some scenario modeling to Irish agriculture. We know the future is uncertain, so we looked at multiple pathways. We know that sustainability is absolute. For example, we have absolute net zero targets. We've got planetary boundaries, which are absolute. They're not about relative efficiency. So the question then is how much of which systems can you fit together in a sustainable and resilient landscape? And secondly, the point that land use change requires time means that we need to be proactive here. We can't just respond based on the market signals because it takes decades to change land use. So if we have a market reactive response, we will fail in terms of effective land use policy. The question then is, where does the bioeconomy fit within those future sustainable and resilient landscape possibilities? And that's where we have this model that we've built over a number of years, which tries to put together different combinations of activity at the landscape scale to look at what the emissions consequences are of those activities, to look at the nitrogen and phosphorus losses to water, ammonia emissions to air, land available for biodiversity provisioning, etc. And in some of the scenarios, I'll just give you a taste of a few scenarios in this short presentation, but some of them show what we call a split gas definition of climate neutrality by 2050, where we meet net zero greenhouse gas emissions for CO2 and N2O, the long-lived gases, and where we have a separate reduction target for methane, which equates to a 32% reduction overall and a 50% reduction in ag emissions. So under business as usual, we could look at current trajectories for animal numbers, for milk and beef outputs, for the very low afforestation rates we have in Ireland at the moment. We have low forest cover, only 11%. We've got very low afforestation rates of 2,000 hectares per year. So that's business as usual. We looked at a sustainable intensification scenario, which focused on maximizing protein output from the milk and beef herds by focusing more on milk production, less on suckler beef production, maximizing dairy beef, so we have maximum protein from cattle in a resource efficient way. We looked at what would happen in 25 years by increasing milk yields by 30% per cow, looking at a very ambitious abatement way beyond the current marginal abatement cost curve that's produced by Teagasc. And then we introduced some elements which you could say are bioeconomy elements, grass clover over most of the grazing area, so that we have a 75% reduction in fertilizer nitrogen. We've got the biomethane strategy being implemented in a way that manages most of the manures that come off livestock systems in Ireland. We assume much higher afforestation rates of up to 16,000 hectares per year from 2030 onwards to give us 500,000 hectares of new forest by 2050. We imagine that we could get 48% of low-value wood from forestry side streams and end-of-life products into bioenergy with carbon capture by 2050. And we imagine quite ambitious re-wetting of bogs and of organic soils under grass. And this is where the hard-nosed choices come in. Many of these things won't happen easily. Some of the things are being planned for, like productivity per animal abatement. That's been planned very well. But other things are not so well planned for, like the structural shifts or the ambition with afforestation and how we use wood products. The bioeconomy scenario considers all this, but adds in additional crop protein production, additional grass protein via biorefineries. It assumes 10% of grass goes to willow so that we can produce more bioenergy feedstock. And again, it assumes that 48% of that bioenergy ends up with carbon capture technology so we can actually achieve active negative emissions. So just to give you a quick snapshot of what this means and why it's important, business as usual here on the second bar actually ends up with even higher emissions than we have under the current scenario, because we have an unconstrained growth, if you like, in milk production in response to market demand globally. And that just means that because of very high residual land use emissions in Ireland, because of organic soil drainage, and because of very high agricultural emissions and very low forestry, we end up with emissions of about 30 million tons of CO2 equivalent from agriculture and land use combined. That's going to be incredibly expensive as we move into the future when we have a cost of non-compliance with climate targets. We have this challenge of residual emissions in Ireland. Even after re-wetting organic soils with the new emission factors, we end up with very high methane emissions, and that means it's very hard to switch these soil emissions off, if you like. So that means we need more negative emissions to offset them. It makes the challenge even bigger. With the sustainable intensification scenario, the high afforestation and some bioenergy with carbon capture gives us some significant negative emissions. But if we ramp up to a bioeconomy scenario, we end up with much bigger negative emissions, up to 8 million tons of CO2 negative emissions by 2050. And that makes a good contribution to bringing down the net emission level in Ireland, not to net zero, but closer to it. The important thing is, because it takes time to change in the land sector, if we look out longer term to 2100, we actually get to absolute net zero if we have this optimistic bioeconomy scenario. We don't with just sustainable intensification, where we don't include the bioeconomy. So the bioeconomy is absolutely critical for giving us these negative emissions that we need so that we can continue to have an active agricultural sector and to offset our other land emissions. And if we look at this in other ways, we can see that business as usual carries many risks, not just across climate, but across water quality impacts, across biodiversity, Economic output might remain quite high, but then we've got the risk of very high compliance costs. We've got social impacts because a lot of farms are not profitable. Most of the returns go to the bigger farms, the more intensive farms. Lots of farms, meanwhile, don't have good returns. That's really going to threaten things like green marketing, the fact that we're exceeding our greenhouse gas targets at national level. We're going to have degraded ecosystems, and we're going to be very dependent on a few products, which is very risky in an uncertain future. So just to summarize, the bioeconomy really gives us a much bigger diversity of output, which is good economically, good to hedge risk. It gives revenue diversification. It gives more diverse landscapes, which are more ecologically resilient. It gives us more high nature value land. It gives us much lower nitrogen and phosphorus losses to water. And it gives us pretty much net zero greenhouse gas emissions from 2065 onward, which is very good going for Ireland, considering the scale of our emissions challenge. So there are lots of positives for the bioeconomy if we can be ambitious and get it to work. And it requires really big choices, hard-nosed choices. And just to show here, we've got much bigger output. We've got more protein being produced, 50% more protein. We've got a lot of biomethane being produced. We've got 64% more timber, 400% more bioenergy. So this is where the bioeconomy could be very beneficial in terms of maximizing output from Ireland's land sector, and even more food production as well, alongside other types of materials and energy. So in summary, business as usual is not sustainable. It's not resilient. It's probably going to be very expensive. Structural change, therefore, ultimately is inevitable. The question is, do we manage that structural change, or are we just subjected to it through unmanaged responses? If we manage it, we've got better chance of good socioeconomic outcome for farmers. Bioeconomy scenarios can deliver more food, more energy, more materials if we have a strategic plan for the landscape. Anaerobic digestion can abate manure emissions. Biorefineries can produce proteins. George will show how cascading wood value chains can give critical negative emissions that we need. We can support agri-food production rather than be in competition with it, because we're given the negative emissions to allow more agri-food production, which we can never fully abate emissions from in the future. But the clock's ticking to really manage a just transition for farmers. It really requires a scientifically informed, open and honest dialogue across all stakeholders, because some very difficult choices and decisions are going to have to be made, and this needs to be done in a democratic way. But we can't hide from those decisions. Those are the hard-nosed choices that we will have to make to have a successful future for Ireland's farmers, and the bioeconomy can play a really important role in that. So that's it for me. Sorry for going over time, and thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Dave. Very, very interesting. One of the nice things about hosting an event like this, you can keep the camera on there for a second, Dave, is that you get to see the slides the night before. So I had a look at this last night, so I was very interested before you ever started presenting when I saw some of the outcomes from this. Just if you go back a couple of slides and you presented how by 2050, comparing the sustainable intensification scenario versus the bioeconomy integrated with sustainable intensification, you were getting a kind of a benefit from a climate neutrality point of view. But when you were getting to 2100, you were really seeing a kind of much bigger benefit getting down to climate neutrality. Why is that difference over time? Why are you seeing that that over the 2100 timeline? What's happening there?
Well, there's two things. I mean, we're really late in the day with respect to 2050 targets to change land. It takes a long time to change land use. You can only ramp up forestry at certain rates. The trees take time to grow. So one thing is that the afforestation in the dark green takes some time to actually take effect. So even if we start planting very ambitiously from 2030 onwards, in the 20 years to 2050, even with those ambitious rates, we only get like maybe 3 or 4 million tons of CO2 benefit from that new afforestation, but that increases by 2100 if we keep planting. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we assume that things like BECCS ramp up. So whilst we might achieve just under 50% of bio-based materials, bioenergy with CCS by 2050, we assume that ramps up to almost 90% later in the century towards 2100. So that's why we end up with a very big BECCS contribution with the kind of the white bricks here. So the combination of technological progress, which George will show, and the combination of delayed effects in the land sector mean that we're likely to see a delayed effect, if you like, to some of these choices, but they are going to ramp up later in the century. And the important thing is that by 2065, we could get to absolute net zero on a bioeconomy pathway, even with these very high residual ag emissions from a very productive ag sector. So that's why I think the bioeconomy is so important for the ag sector, for the rest of the ag sector, for agri-food. We need those negative emissions, but they won't happen without a lot of effort.
Brilliant. Another question, Dave. So we talk about transformational change that's required and structural change that's required to achieve this. And speaking to farmers, like a lot of farmers feel that they've just followed advice they were given over time, and now they're at times, you know, being the ones who are asked to make these changes. So what would you say to farmers in terms of the changes that need to be made? Like, so there are certainly changes that are going to be made, but it's not all negative in terms of the changes. There's a lot that's coming through in terms of resilience, diversification, and things like that. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I guess farmers have been pulled in different directions over time, like with the drainage, being told to drain land and then re-wet it, and you can understand they're skeptical then of some of the messages, and it's difficult, and nobody wants to be told what to do with their own lands. But at the same time, I think it's very clear when you look at where the world is going and the scale of the problem of climate change, that there will be inevitable change forced upon farmers if we don't proactively manage it. So I think the issue for farmers is that they would like some guardrails in place. They would like to know there's a clear long-term vision that we can stick to, and then they know where we're going and they know why we're doing things, and they know it's good for the whole sector. So I think if we really had some stronger long-term planning and vision and ambition, we don't know where we're going. We always feel like we're reacting, and I think that's what is frustrating for farmers, that things feel like they're changing all the time with no good reason. But if we had a fixed vision of what we aim for, then I think that would help get farmers on board, because they would see the value for everybody in having this kind of strategy. So and if you like, unconstrained rights now to do whatever you like now have very big costs for future farmers. We're taking away the rights of future farmers to do things in different ways. So it's not all on farmers. I think farmers respond very positively when the signals are there, but they need to know there's a consistent signal and vision that we're going in a clear direction. And we need to implement the pull factors, like we need to drive the demand for the biomaterials. So it has to come from those industries almost setting up first, or in parallel with, so that there's some kind of guaranteed market. That's where the government perhaps needs to step in to bridge that chicken egg gap and create incentives. So that's what's challenging.
Great, thanks, Dave. If you do have any more questions for Dave, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them over the course of the webinar. So thanks a million, Dave. Really interesting. So our next talk is going to come from Dr. George Bishop. So George is a quantitative environmental sustainability scientist at the University of Galway. His primary research pursuits revolve around using forward-looking life cycle assessment to explore and understand the complex systems transformations necessary to achieve net zero and bioeconomy ambitions. His past work has evaluated the environmental sustainability of various bio-based systems, including bioproducts, bioenergy, carbon dioxide removal technologies, practices and approaches, livestock systems, national AFLU, and waste management strategies. George is an LCA analyst on the InformBio project, which aims to develop a low carbon roadmap for Ireland's bioeconomy. So over to you, George. We can see your slides now.
Perfect. Thanks, James. And hi, everyone. As James just said, I'm George Bishop. I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Galway on the InformBio project. Let me just start a timer here. My expertise, as James said, lies in kind of environmental sustainability assessment of the bioeconomy, particularly in forward-looking life cycle assessment. As we just heard from Dave, the bioeconomy has huge potential to aid Ireland in its ambitious climate targets. My work explores in detail some of the potential bioeconomy technologies in an Irish context. So for this project, we wanted to explore a number of bioeconomy value chains to run LCAs on. But the bioeconomy scope is vast. I mean, it really covers anything that deals with biological resources. And for a country that is so rich in biological resources, there are so many pathways for bioeconomy implementation. So where do I begin in my modeling? In an earlier InformBio work package, Dr. Riju Kargupta identified around 70 bio-based value chains that could be suitable for islands. But even that's too many for me to model in a relatively short project. So Riju and the team produced a list of 10 criteria which one could potentially use to rank these bioeconomy value chains. This list included things like the potential for avoidance of conflict with competing uses of biomass, scalability of value chains, potential of value chains to kind of provide social benefits like job creation and quality of life, a potential for near-term viability, looking at TRLs, and so on. So we created that list, and then we took it to a number of bioeconomy stakeholders at one of our workshops to rank their perceived importance of these criteria. Then using that allowed us to rank the 70 bioeconomy value chains using this kind of weighted approach. And then it was on these top perceived priority value chains that we've run LCA on, alongside techno-economic assessment that was led by Riju. Just a small plug here that I just very quickly sums up Riju's work, but it was a lot more than that. So it can be found in these two nice reports in the websites at the bottom of the slide there. So yeah, as I was saying, I was involved in running some of the LCAs on these value chains. Today, I'm just going to be showing 3 of these, but we covered a few more on top of that, as well as Riju's TA, which I also won't cover. For those who are unfamiliar, LCA, or life cycle assessment, is a methodology for evaluating the environmental impact of a product, service, or system across its entire life cycle, from raw material extraction to disposal. It involves quantifying resource use, emissions, and waste generation at each stage. The collected data is then translated into relevant impact categories, such as global warming potential, or water depletion, or toxicity. So I'm not going to be going into too much into the LCA specifics in this talk. I kind of will refer you to the individual studies for those specifics. But I will say that we've taken a prospective approach for each study, kind of to better understand the potential environmental impacts of future decisions. I just really want to hammer home a point here. So to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees to avoid the most severe impacts, the IPCC has made it very clear we need to reach global net zero carbon dioxide emissions by around 2050 and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by around 2070, though most national targets, including islands, aim for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Achieving this is going to require drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors. However, as Dave discussed in his presentation, islands' agriculture and land use sector, as well as other sectors, are significant emitters. Thus, active removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to compensate for these hard to abate residual emissions is also required, as well as to aid in any return of any overshoot of 1.5. One such carbon dioxide removal technology is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS. This is a process that captures and permanently stores biogenic CO2 from the conversion of biomass into bioenergy. During the incineration of biomass, biogenic CO2 is released, but instead of letting it escape, carbon capture technology is applied to trap the emissions. The captured CO2 is then pressurized into a liquid-like state for transportation via ships and pipelines. Once transported, the CO2 is injected deep underground into porous rock formations such as saline aquifers or depleted gas reservoirs, where it is permanently sequestered. So in our study, we use dynamic LCA This is just a LCA approach which really accounts for time better. So this study quantified the global warming impact of using sawmill residues for bioenergy under various scenarios, with and without an intermediate cascading use as particle board, and with and without carbon capture and storage applied to the bioenergy plants. So our study was divided into two key perspectives. In part one, we assessed how progressive decarbonization in the technosphere affects climate mitigation. As mentioned, we focused on 4 distinct value chains, each using a reference flow of 1 ton of carbon contained in sawmill residues. So to reflect these increasing levels of decarbonization, we deployed, we developed 7 scenarios for each of the 4 value chains. This gave us kind of 28 distinct dynamic scenarios. So this figure illustrates the CO2 emissions in kilograms at each stage of the value chain for part 1. So biogenic CO2 flows are in blue, fossil CO2 flows in black, and substitution credits in orange. These represent kind of avoided emissions that would have occurred. So as we can see in the top is the scenario which assumes no decarbonization. The total substitution credits were approximately 3 tons of CO2 for the direct bioenergy, but for the cascading use in particle board before bioenergy, substitution credits were around 7 tons of CO2. By contrast, as seen in the bottom with the highest decarbonization, total substitution credits, they dropped to about 0.7 tons of CO2, really reflecting these diminished benefit of substitution as the technosphere decarbonizes. And then when CCS is deployed, about 3.3 tons of CO2 are permanently stored. So these show the dynamic results, dynamic LCA results. And as you can see at the top here, the direct BECCS on the top right always outperforms bioenergy without CCS, regardless of the decarbonization level. But the relative advantages of the direct bioenergy versus the cascading use in particle boards depends on the decarbonization context. The cascading use generally outperforms the direct bioenergy scenarios, especially at lower decarbonization levels due to the significant substitution credits I showed in the last slides. But at higher decarbonization, the loss of these substitution credits means that the best option is more nuanced. However, while this suggests that decarbonizing the wider economy will significantly diminish the climate benefits of BECCS, it's important to note that these scenarios do not account for the time aspect of progressive CCS deployment or decarbonization through time, which are considerations we accounted for in part 2 of the study, where we traced the annual flows of 1 ton of carbon in sawmill residues derived from a sustainably managed forest. We explicitly incorporated time-dependent progressive deployment of CCS and bioenergy alongside decarbonization trends and annual forest carbon fluxes. So 2 utilization pathways are modeled: residues converted to bioenergy directly or via cascading particle board, both with progressive CCS deployment and decarbonization. Additionally, a scenario was considered in which harvesting ceases and the allocated forest area was left to mature unharvested from year 1, kind of maximizing ecosystem carbon storage. So here are the dynamic LCA results of the direct bioenergy with progressive CCS pathway and via a cascading use pathway. Although both scenarios resulted in positive environmental outcomes and will ultimately introduce a cooling effect, the cascading scenario was consistently more negative. This was initially due to the substitution credits I discussed, but temporary carbon storage during the particle board's 30-year service life also bought time for greater CCS deployment at the time of bioenergy conversion, reducing the carbon emissions relative to the same ton of residues converted directly to bioenergy in the BECCS scenario. Then, as the economy approaches full decarbonization, substitution credits kind of end, but the simultaneous coupled attainment of this 100% CCS ensured sustained net negative emissions and long-term biogenic carbon storage. If we look at what if we apply CCS on bioenergy immediately and keep everything else the same, we can see the extra climate mitigation through time. But conversely, in scenarios where CCS was never implemented on the bioenergy, the opposite is true. So the counterfactual unharvested forest area with economic allocation required less area. And I mean, the mass allocation kind of represents maybe a unrealistic conservative scenario here. But what does this all mean? Well, again, all scenarios ultimately deliver net climate benefits. However, without cascading use, unharvested forests can deliver stronger near-term cooling than the direct diversion to bioenergy, even with full BECCS deployment. But cooling rapidly declines as the forests mature over decades. Crossover points highlight the critical role of cascading use into BECCS to ensure continuous and enduring cooling effects. So here we can see the total accumulated carbon storage over time. So it takes a while for the CCS to scale up, but once it does, the long-term gains are significant, eventually storing much more carbon than the unharvested forest, which plateaus as it matures. So transferring biogenic carbon from forests to geological stores via multiple uses is likely to enhance the longevity and resilience, really, of the carbon dioxide removal in a rapidly warming world. So in our next case study, led by James Gaffey, we undertook an LCA to assess the environmental impacts of different pathways to produce leaf protein concentrate from grass biomass in an integrated green biorefinery. System boundaries included the cultivation of grass and grass clover, where it's sent to this integrated biorefinery to produce this leaf protein concentrate, as well as co-producing press cake and brown juice. The leaf protein concentrate can be used as a high protein feed, potentially substituting soybean meal. The press cake can be used as a ruminant feed, and the brown juice, we assumed, went to an integrated anaerobic digestion system where the digestate could be applied as fertilizer back on the grass, and the biogas used an internal CHP system to provide some of the internal power, but also export some extra to the grid. So considering the functional unit of 1 ton of dry matter of crude protein delivered from the leaf protein concentrate, we have 2 scenarios of different feedstocks, perennial ryegrass alone or with a clover mixture, and two different technology pathways. These results show the percentage change from soybean meal, because that's really what we're looking to replace. So we can see here that the climate change emission intensity for leaf protein concentrate was about 55 to 85% lower per ton of crude protein compared with the soybean meal. However, climate change is not the only area of environmental concern. Acidification and freshwater eutrophication burdens were around 55 to 90% lower than soybean meal. Some scenarios of the green biorefinery produce leaf protein concentrate with a larger non-renewable energy resource burden than the soybean meal, though this was mitigated with higher renewable energy integration within the scenario. So overall, we found that the green biorefinery can produce high quality protein with a lower environmental burden than the soybean meal. But the choice of feedstock and system design were critical factors for the overall environmental performance. I'm massively running over time here, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly. So on this third case study I'm going to share today is a large consequential LCA study we are currently working on to evaluate the environmental performance of 61 prospective AD systems in Ireland, and includes both large and small-scale plants. 11 feedstock mixes derived from commercial project plans and agronomic recommendations were modeled under a wide range of realistic technology configurations for large-scale systems. These included variations in biomethane end use, liquid digestate treatment strategies, and carbon capture technologies for the large-scale systems. And for the small-scale systems, configurations differed in biogas utilization and digestate handling. I should say central to this analysis is the application of the new advanced LCAD 2.0 model by Dr. Andres Martinez-Ade, which enabled highly detailed modeling of this AD processes, capturing system components and emissions that are really often overlooked in conventional AD studies. So I won't go into too much detail here on the differences coming from the AD configurations of feedstock mixes. I have enough to talk about in its own presentation. But as you can see from the graph showing global warming potential per ton of dry matter, when both configuration and feedstock design are optimized, anaerobic digestion can deliver net climate mitigation. However, as we can also see in the graph, both factors need to be working together to achieve these savings. This is, it gets a little bit complex here, so don't worry so much. But this graph is showing the per ton of dry matter single scores, where each bar is broken down into the proportional weighted contributions of 16 impact categories. Each bar represents a different combination of feedstock mix and AD configuration. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the key takeaway is that even when the overall single score is negative, indicating a net environmental benefit, there are still individual impact categories that show a net burden. In other words, while anaerobic digestion can reduce some impact categories like climate change, it may simultaneously increase others, such as eutrophication or land use pressures. These trade-offs make the answer to, is it good or not, more nuanced, as it ultimately depends on which environmental priorities you consider most important and what aspects of the AD system you want to maximize. Do you want to maximize biomethane production, or do you want to use it to really help with nutrient cycling and so on? We explore these trade-offs in much greater depth. In fact, they're actually central to analysis in our upcoming manuscript. So keep an eye out for that if you like to dig deeper into those results. Hurrying up. As I mentioned earlier, there were a few more LCAs completed that I didn't share due to lack of time. This included things like pyrolysis biochar and torrefaction biocoal. So these will be collated in a deliverable and kind of maybe by early next year be available in the website link at the bottom here. So for us, the next steps will be to expand on these LCAs to explore national deployment of these bioeconomy value chains in a similar way to what Dave showed in his presentation. We hope to explore questions such as, how does the scale up of these technologies affect the agriculture and land use sector? How can these pathways be used most optimally? Perhaps co-locations of technologies are required. How can cascading uses be implemented into these value chains? And so on. So to wrap up, there are a large number of potential pathways within the bioeconomy space, but we really need to be careful to avoid environmental trade-offs and burden shifting, where solving one problem creates another elsewhere. It is important that future assessments clearly separate biogenic and fossil emissions, removals and substitution credits, rather than lumping them together, especially when time plays such a critical role. When and how emissions and removals occur, and progressive decarbonization, reducing credits, can make a huge difference in the overall environmental impact. We also shouldn't forget the value of cascading uses, ensuring that biomass delivers the most climate benefit across multiple life cycles before it's used. And finally, if Ireland is serious about achieving net zero, we need to start investing in carbon capture and storage now, so that the necessary infrastructure is in place when large-scale deployment becomes essential. Before I finish, I think it's worth remembering that the theme of this webinar, the cost of not developing a circular bioeconomy. I'll leave you with this. Building a circular bioeconomy will cost money, but the price of inaction in economic terms, as well as environmental terms, will be far higher. I'm just happy to be the one presenting this work. It's not all of my work. So thanks to the rest of the InformBio team, the Foresight and Fusion researchers I've been working with, thanks to IA Bioenergy Task 45, who we work closely with for the BECS work, and of course, staff for funding the project. Thank you very much. Sorry I ran over. Feel free to ask questions or feel free to email me here. Thanks, James. Sorry, I ran over.
No problem, George. It was very interesting. Well done. And really nice, diverse case studies. It's nice that you covered the trade-offs, which is really important. Climate often gets the limelight, but there are other issues like water quality, which are big issues for Ireland as well, that those trade-offs sometimes, while impacting on and mitigating from a climate perspective, might be having negative impacts elsewhere. So that's the beauty of life cycle assessment, being able to compare and look at the impacts of some of these. Just a question, George, on so you've given some kind of diverse case studies there. Dave has also given us some little bits of indications around simulating over the longer term what the impacts of these could be. I guess it's not a silver bullet, and you will need a combination of solutions. But in terms of what you're looking at there, what seems to be the kind of one that you think might have the biggest impact from an Irish perspective?
Yeah, so I guess it comes down to what we hope to achieve. I mean, if climate targets are essential for the healthy planet, so if we want to achieve these net zero targets, I think we need to be really investing in these net negative technologies, especially when we have such high hard to abate sectors. So for me, BECCS or other kind of CDR, carbon dioxide removal technologies are essential. But I would also say that one of the benefits of the bioeconomy, as I talked to my first slides, is the scope of the bioeconomy is huge. And I think we should really utilize that. I think having a huge array of diverse solutions will help offset lots of these trade-offs. So CCS is great for climate mitigation, but there's other potentials to help with biodiversity, with water depletion, with eutrophication, and I think it's going to require, like I said, a suite of these technologies to kind of be working together almost. I mean, it's not an individual technologies separate, everything comes together as the bioeconomy, and I think that's really where the space needs to be. But of course, as I said, I do think CCS and especially BECCS has the potential to play a huge role for Ireland. So long story short, maybe BECCS, but I need this whole suite of technologies.
Thanks, John. Perfect. We have a question from Mark, who says, very well augmented takeaways. However, do we consider burning biomass as part of the bioeconomy? But I think your work shows that the mitigation impacts are improved when you don't just burn the biomass, would be my takeaway from the BECCS study as well.
Yeah, so I mean, that's right. I mean, if it's the bioeconomy, it's really anything to do with biological resources. But I think what we show is it really does need that cascading use before it goes into the bioenergy. So we're not taking virgin wood from the forest and then burning it immediately into these bioenergy plants. Bioenergy itself absolutely has a role to play, especially as we, decarbonize our electricity. It's mostly going to be wind and solar, which are intermittent. They're not always going to be sunny. It's not always going to be windy. Having something like bioenergy, which you can turn on and off, well, maybe not off, but always have available, is really going to be important to help kind of in that kind of grid. In my opinion, anyway. I'm sure other people might disagree.
Perfect. Thanks, George. Really appreciate that. We might come back with some more questions. Thanks, Mark, for the question, and keep questions coming in for the next part. So we're going to move on to the second part of our agenda, which is going to be the panel discussions. So I'll just share screen for a second. And we have, as part of our panel discussion, so we have 3 members of our panel. So we have Evan Carey. Evan is Administrative Officer with the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment here in Ireland. He works in the Land Use and Sectoral Policy Unit on the Bioeconomy team. He's responsible for circular bioeconomy policy, including the Bioeconomy Action Plan of Ireland 2023 to 2025, the upcoming bioeconomy strategy, which is under development in Ireland for 2026 to 2030, coordination of the cross-departmental bioeconomy implementation and development group, and organisation of Bioeconomy Ireland Week. We also have Stefan Mayer, Stefan is a group leader for applied sustainability assessment at DBFZ, a federal institution in Germany that conducts applied research into the energetic and integrated material use of biomass. Stefan is responsible for projects in which he delivers various LCA case studies focused on optimizing environmental performance of bioenergy systems. And Stefan, since 2018, has been national team leader for Germany at IEA Bioenergy Task 45, which focuses on the climate and sustainability effects of bioenergy within the circular bioeconomy. And last but not least, we have Ellie Foster. Ellie is Forestry and BECS Carbon Accounting Specialist and Head of Forest Carbon at Drax in the UK. And she has a PhD in environmental science and forestry from Bangor University, and has previously worked as an LCA consultant in the forestry and wood sectors with a focus on maximizing the contribution of sustainable forestry to a circular net zero economy. So I would invite Evan, Ellie, and Stefan to share your cameras. George and Dave, you can share your cameras if you want to as well, in case we get some additional questions, which we might get to once we've had some questions with the panel to begin with. So maybe to begin with, I might start with you, Evan. So it's Bioeconomy Ireland Week this week. So we're flying the flag and talking about all the great things that are happening, and there is a lot of them that are happening in the Irish bioeconomy. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the strategies and investments that the Irish government is making to develop and implement a circular bioeconomy here in Ireland?
Yes, thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. So the government's approach to developing a circular economy is kind of two-pronged. It's both strategic and practical. It combines long-term policy direction through our strategies and action plans with investment in research and regional action through the various funding mechanisms. At the strategic level, we have our national policy statement on the bioeconomy from 2018, and this sets out the vision for the bioeconomy in Ireland, which is to harness renewable biological resources to produce food, feed, materials, energy, but while also supporting rural and regional development and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. To realise the vision, we moved on to the action plan, which was published in 2023 and runs up until the end of this year. So the action plan itself provides a cross-government framework spread across 7 pillars that connects agriculture, enterprise, environment, climate, energy, education and rural development, alongside focus on research. The plan itself identifies priority areas such as developing regional bioeconomy clusters, scaling demonstration and pilot projects, promoting circularity in the agri-food sector, and also stimulating and creating demand for bio-based products. So as we come to the end of the plan, at the end of this year, we'll move towards the development and introduction of our national bioeconomy strategy. So this will run from 2026 until 2030. It'll further build upon these actions within the action plan and also target several priority areas for development within the Irish bioeconomy over the next 5 years. In terms of investment, there's been over 31 million euro worth of funding for bioeconomy research and demonstration in recent years. You highlighted some of these, James, at the beginning of the webinar. So we have the EU Just Transition Fund, which is designed to support regional bioeconomy hubs and demonstration projects, particularly in the Midlands region with in areas of former peat production. The funding itself within the EU Just Transition offers the opportunity for close collaboration between multiple stakeholders across the entire bio-based value chains. So far there's been 2 calls, with 4 projects of 5 million each, so a total of 20 million. In the first call, we had the Mount Lucas aquaculture demonstration plant site and the Lachine National Bioeconomy Campus. Call 2 was just recently closed and results should be announced in due course. Another large-scale funding mechanism is the Shared Island Initiative, which is a collaboration between the Irish government and the executive in Northern Ireland on collaboration on bio-based projects. There was a call in 2024, a 9 million call for 2 projects. The Regenerate project, led by Greenville Engineering, to develop bio-based fertilizer, and then AIM-Bio to the All-Ireland Marine bio-based refineries for a circular blue economy, and this is led by Teagasc. Outside of those 2 main ones, we have other funding for research through the EPA, Research Island, the SCAI, and also Department of Agriculture's own research programs. And on a kind of enterprise scale, Enterprise Ireland has their support schemes, innovation vouchers for helping SMEs and startups to commercialize their new technologies. So this is all about building an enabling environment from the government's point of view, and supporting innovation across the value chains and ensuring that Ireland supports the bioeconomy both economically and environmentally.
Thanks, Evan. I'm going to come to Stefan next. Stefan, coming from the international perspective, Evan has talked about the technologies getting deployed, but in terms of maybe over the longer term, supporting the development of bio-based technologies which can contribute to climate mitigation. Are there any international examples through your work at DBFZ or IEA Task 45 that you could highlight that we could maybe learn from an Irish perspective?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, first of all, and thanks, James, for the introduction. And I also would like to congratulate Dave and George for the impressive presentations. Maybe for those of you wondering what DBFZ is, that's an acronym for a very long German word, which would translate into something like German Biomass Research Center. So we are a non-profit research organization located in Germany. But to answer your question, well, actually, it sounds like a simple question, but it's not that easy, right? Because I think there are a couple of very good examples, and you could go through them. But the interesting question is also, like, why do some of these case studies actually work, and why they are successful, and can they be somehow transferred to other countries? And yeah, what needs to be considered if you think about these things? I think the success of these usually depends on the country conditions and the preconditions in each of the countries, which can be very different. So there are things like the resource base, the markets, are they developed or not, the demand side, but also the infrastructure that needs to be considered here. And I'm very thankful for both presentations this morning, because they already also highlighted that this transition into a bio-based economy, or the development of bio-based technologies, actually takes time, right? So it takes time for development, for scaling them, like to coordinate value chains and interactions between different entities along the value chain. Feedstock management is pretty important. So you can go on for quite a long time. And ideally, like what policies or governments would do is that they somehow catalyze this transition by basically de-risking investments, and, for example, helping with funding R&Ds, or, as Dave also mentioned, creating like a pull for bio-based products in the end, creating markets, right? So I would say, depending on the specific situation of a country, it's often a mix of measures that is needed, and that also makes these cases, and I'm going to mention two in a minute, successful. So it can be things like R&D support, but also to help to create markets, things like quotas or mandates or auctions, right? And also things like public procurement, for example. And I think there's a long list of potential policy instruments that could help to develop bio-based technologies. But maybe just to highlight two examples, maybe one to connect to George's presentation, I think when we talk about BECCS, or maybe also bioenergy with carbon capture and utilization, and then maybe storage at a later stage, I think there are some pretty impressive examples if you look at Northern Europe, Sweden, for example, or Denmark, which actually show that there can be an immediate deployment opportunity for BECCS with existing biomass plants, right? So if you have biomass plants available and you create the right environment, the right policy environment, the development can be pretty fast, actually. And I think what Sweden and Denmark, what they're doing is they have set up basically a strategy, so kind of a roadmap on how to approach things, basically recognizing the potential and the resources that they have with regards to existing biomass plants. But they also thought about, for example, the role of the carbon dioxide removals that can be created with these systems in their national compensation strategies. Thought about things like the storage strategy and other things, all of that being pretty important. And then I think on a policy level, what's also super interesting here is that this, for example, the Swedish case creates a combination of state support with an auction system with a financing from the voluntary market, which would come then from private institutions. And I think this is also quite an interesting approach to it, if you don't want to just being reliant on the one or the other sector, the public or the private sector. So I think this is an interesting case, which shows us that if you have a certain precondition, like in this case, existing bioenergy facilities, and you create the right policy environment, things can go pretty fast, right? Just to mention here very quickly that IEA, George, you mentioned this, has done also a lot of work. There's an interesting Intertask project. So if you're interested in this, I think there are a lot of resources that you can download from the IEA website to learn more about this. And then maybe quickly, the second example that I would like to mention is a greenhouse gas related quota system for the transport sector. So this is an instrument that we use here in Germany, and I'm not bringing this up because it's German. I mention it because it's I know it quite well, and I think it works, and it does different things that I like. Well, the basic idea here is basically that fuel suppliers, the companies that produce fuel and bring it to the market, have to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets. And they are dynamic. That means that they are increasing over time. And this has basically two key effects. The first one is that even for fossil value chains, companies start to optimize their processes, try to reduce emissions. And the other thing is that they start to blend in alternative fuels. So it creates a market pull for alternative fuels with a better greenhouse gas performance, because they can help the companies to achieve the targets. And then what it also does, what is quite interesting, is it also creates an incentive, or it creates competition between the different alternative fuel pathways and the producers of those fuels to bring down their greenhouse gas reduction costs or mitigation costs. Which is also super interesting if you want to be, in a competitive environment, and you want to create an environment that also creates ambition and further improvement in the system. Also for this one, and then I'm going to stop here. If you want to learn more about this quota system, there's a background paper that we have produced at DBFZ. You can find it on our homepage, or you can let me know. I'm happy to share the paper with you. It goes very much into detail, but it helps to understand the logic of the instrument.
Thanks, Stefan. Some really nice examples at different areas of the value chain. Maybe Dave or Stefan, if you want to maybe, and if you have time to put the IEA Task 45 link in the chat, because as Stefan said, there's some nice case studies, as well as the publication that Stefan mentioned as well. So I'm going to move next to Ellie. So Ellie, Stefan touched on it, and then George also covered BECCS in his presentation, and the opportunity that this offers. And this is something that you're commercially working on in terms of implementation over in the UK with DRAX. So can you talk to us about some of the work that you're doing at the moment in DRAX over in the UK?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I'd like to also touch on Dave and George's presentations, which I thought were fantastic. And just touching on the point that Dave made on the importance of a really clear long-term vision and strategy for decarbonisation and a circular bioeconomy, because it really is fundamental to the scale up and implementation of technologies like BECCS and other low carbon and negative carbon emissions technologies, to make all of the components that are needed for a BECCS project to be successful, because like Stefan said, it really is location specific. So DRACS, there's two components to DRACS. There's the UK operations, where we have a biomass to electricity power station in the north of England, and there is ambition to retrofit carbon capture and storage technology onto that. So it's much like the projects that are moving forward successfully in Denmark and Sweden, where you've got an existing bioenergy facility that is going to be retrofitted. But we also have another arm to the business called Eliminating. It's a sister business which is focusing on international projects, and actually they are working with HOFOR and the Danish utility on their project to help bring the carbon credits to market. So we are very much operating or moving towards operating in the BECCS sector. But that, as I said, it doesn't come without its challenges. And certainly when you're operating on a retrofit scenario, you're overcoming a lot of those significant challenges actually to getting BECCS operational, because there's so many components. There's the biomass feedstocks, and all of the logistics associated with that, and to ensure a long-term sustainable biomass supply. And then you've got the infrastructure itself for the BECCS facility. You've got connection to the grid. You've got development connection to the transport, so pipelines, and then ultimately to storage. So there are a lot of really complex components to bring a BECCS project into fruition. And actually, there's quite a limited number of areas geographically where you can actually make that happen. So it's not a silver bullet, but it has the opportunity to be, it is one of the most promising, scalable net emissions technologies, and it certainly has a role to play. I mean, and within the UK, it is uniquely positioned because we have that facility and that infrastructure, and we have the established biomass supply chains, and the project. The biggest challenge for the project is having that real clear political backing and the policy supporting that to make sure that each element of these projects can happen simultaneously in parallel. So that's, I would say, the biggest challenge, particularly in the UK. Thanks,
Ellie. And at the moment, is there policy support to support the BECCS industry to incentivize BECCS integration within bioenergy systems? There is, and it is embedded into UK decarbonisation targets. It's getting it over the line is the support of the investment in the kind of the downstream portion. So BECCS should be part of a net zero kind of hub in the Humber region. So there are multiple organisations involved in it, from the establishment of the transport and storage, and then connection to the likes of BECCS and potentially other CO2 emitters in the fossil industry as well. So it's bringing all those components together and getting the green light for investment in each of these elements of the value chain, which is just not quite over the line yet. Okay, thank you. Dave and George, I'm just going to come back to you for a second, whoever wants to kind of come to this, and it kind of goes back to the question I think Mark put in the chat earlier, which is if we look at bio-based systems, that we consider this kind of balance between energy, but also materials, and particularly with biorefineries, where the approach tends to focus on cascading, extracting value over time, and then you always have a residue which can be used to create energy for the system. And I think there's a balance there between profitability and mitigation and finding the happy space that's in between. But if we look, Dave or George, at the material side and balancing the material potential for climate mitigation versus the bioenergy side, can you talk about some of the benefits? I think George touched on this a little bit with the cascading use of materials over time, but maybe to think about that point, because I suppose that's where we're going at the moment with some of the technologies in Ireland.
I think it's a good question, James. I think it's not really an either or, because often you will have materials being produced with side streams which are lower value, and of course you could find other ways of keeping those side streams in material for a bit longer, but often for not very long because they're low quality, so they'll ultimately end up at some point being ideal bioenergy feedstock. So I don't think it's an either or, because if we want to expand our biomaterials value chains, we'll have side streams. Also, at some point, it might make sense to say, well, look, at this point in the value chain, the material is of a certain quality or contaminated and it needs to go to a certain treatment, like could be pyrolysis for biochar, or it could be cleaner for BECCS or something else. So I think it all needs to fit together. And I think we need to be very efficient in our use of bio-based resources because we're not infinite. At the same time, we've got a huge job to replace all the fossil-based carbon in the economy. We don't have to replace it all, because actually we use alternative energy for a lot of that to do a lot of the heavy lifting for fuels, but we still have a lot of needs for carbon in the economy, and that's where the bio-based resources come in. So we need to use them smartly in cascading ways. Energy is part of that cascade. I think it's just a logical part of the cascade, whether it's side streams or end of life. So I really don't see it as in competition. I just see it as part of the move towards a bioeconomy, which is designed to be a smart bioeconomy. It doesn't solve all our problems, but it does do some things uniquely well, and it fills gaps that can't be addressed by the technical options and technical circularity.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to ask a question. I'll ask it to Evan, but maybe Stefan and Ellie can come in if you have a perspective on it as well. So it's really when we get into the commercialization of new technologies, where initially it's coming from, let's say, the research, and you're scaling up to kind of demonstration, and you're trying to prove it in a scale that's relevant for industry. And at some point, and that's what's happening at the moment, Evan, with some of the technologies that are being developed here in Ireland in the demo scale biorefinery scenarios and pilot scale. And at some point, then you want industry to take this to the next level. So where's the balance in that, and how do you support that so that we get not only these results being shown at demonstration level, but also these results being implemented within the commercial sector?
Thanks, James. I think any transition within the bioeconomy will happen in phases. So there has to be a balance between being public-led and the private leadership then eventually taking over. So I think we are in we were in Ireland, we kind of moved out of the early stage, the initial research and pilots. This is where public funding would have been essential. It would have been support, risk taking, building knowledge, and then the building itself of the demonstration and pilot projects to test that feasibility. I think we're moving out of that now into a market creation phase, where the focus is on creating the conditions for investment. Our role as government is to create that enabling framework, the stable policy, the stable incentives, and clear regulation. And one way we can do this as government is promoting green public procurement. Our department has a strategy for green public procurement for across public institutions. We also think there's a role for public-private partnerships at this stage between ourselves and government, the research bodies, and in private enterprises. The next stage would then be scale up and kind of broader commercialization. I think this is where industry should be taking over, but there's still the role for the government to be the enabling kind of support in the background.
And just on that, Evan, like for the first industries coming through, there's a risk there for them possibly. So there might be, is there anything that can be, you know, that we can think of maybe in terms of supporting that journey from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work going on with DEDI and Enterprise Ireland, so they'll have a lot of innovation grants, supports, the expertise there with if it's on a small scale, perhaps the local enterprise offices, and they'd have their expertise there at a local and regional level. And then at a national level, there's the role then for kind of the broader Enterprise Ireland network and their funding streams to invest. Perhaps then even if it goes a bit further than that, there's the kind of the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland have funds to invest if it's a bit larger scale. So I think there's certainly a lot there. I'll share a link in the chat to our Government of Ireland page. There's a bit more detail there, and we have breakdowns on funding opportunities for all scales.
Thanks, Evan. I don't know, Ellie and Stefan, if you want to come in. I think, Ellie, you're working on what's an emerging technology, and at the bringing that now into the commercial sphere. And also, Stefan, in Germany, there's been a lot of work to commercialize bio-based technologies today. So if there's anything you want to mention on kind of bridging that divide, going from kind of large scale demonstrators into industry, and that balance between the going from, let's say, what Evan talked about there, which is the government at least scale up support, to full scale implementation, and what needs to be in place maybe for the early movers.
I don't know, Alice, do you want to go first, or?
You go ahead first.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be very brief. I like the approach from Evan to break it down into different phases. And fingers crossed that you're going to be successful. I think the presentations before have really shown it, that it's really important to be successful with the development of the bioeconomy. So I hope the second phase is successful. Maybe one takeaway message from Germany and also other countries is, after the second one, there might be a third phase, right, which is also important. And then this one, it's from my point of view, really necessary to establish monitoring instruments to really see how the bio-based economy in the different sectors really develops. And if you see potential problems also, right, you have maybe established certain funding instruments which might create also problems between the different sectors. So you want to keep an eye on that. And then there's this whole range of potential externalities. George mentioned a couple of those trade-offs that might be there. So externalities with regards to biomass sustainability, land use, waste streams, and other things. And this is very important to be monitored while the bioeconomy hopefully grows. And then I think the third thing that is really important is you want to avoid any lock-in to potential solutions that might seem optimal right now at this point in time, but maybe in the future you might need your biomass resources in other sectors, right? So therefore, I guess monitoring is a pretty important instrument as well.
Thanks, Stefan. Ellie, do you want to give an opinion?
Thank you. I just did a minute ago, but I think I would again just reiterate the importance of the enabling policy environment and that long-term commitment, because to get large-scale projects off the ground, you need to attract capital. You need to, in the case of BECCS, where a key component of the business case is the sale of carbon credits, you need to be able to with confidence, give investors and stakeholders confidence that the project is going to be implemented in a timely way, and deliver on the investment in a timely way. And so a key component of that is understanding and knowing that, for example, the planning permission is going to go ahead in a timely way, that the other supporters or players in the the value chain, whether it's landowners or those involved in transport and storage of the CO2, are also similarly supported, so that all these components can come together. And that's fundamental to de-risking the investment and attracting that capital, private capital.
Thanks, Ellie. And lots of the things you mentioned there are relevant to things we're seeing in Ireland as well. So there's definitely some similarities. So I think we're right at the end of the webinar. So I think it was really, really interesting to get from George and Dave, a more quantitative assessment of how the work that's currently under development can contribute to Ireland's potential for climate mitigation and the role that the bioeconomy can play in helping to achieve this. So thanks so much for that. And then thanks to our national and international experts, so Evan, Ellie and Stefan. Really appreciate all your inputs. Thanks to Dabi as well for helping with the scheduling and putting all this together too. And this will be recorded, so people will be able to watch it back. So we'll be putting this up later. And thanks to everyone else for participating, and have a good rest of Bioeconomy Ireland week. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Well.